Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. It's Law and Legitimacy. At least we think it is. I don't know which parallel universe I'm living in some days, or what avatar from a different universe somebody's using me for. But in any case, no Proud Boys trial today. That's nice. And more drama in the trial yesterday. I can speak only cryptically about it, but I want to just note a certain irony. As the Proud Boys trial began, a Connecticut judge suspended my law license for 6 months because I had given files in Jones's case to co-counsel in another case of Jones, and his office inadvertently leaked it to an adversary. And for this, I must die. Well, of course, according to this judge, and we'll see what the appellate court has to say about that. But yet, in the course of the Proud Boy trial, we've had a number of misadventures. One of them included the government standing up one day and announcing that it inadvertently linked national security documents to us, or confidential and we were ordered not to read them. And I'm thinking, okay, who dies over this? Then yesterday, we'd had a series of sealed proceedings in this case. The judge issues orders saying the courtroom will be closed and the media excluded, and we're ordered not to talk about what occurs in these sealed proceedings. That's rubbed some of us the wrong way. A defendant has a right to a speedy and public trial. The judge has his reasons for closing the court. As an officer of his court, I have to obey those rules and not talk about the items that are sealed. The press got wind of it this last week in a recent series of events. Got a lawyer to come in and object to the sealing order. The judge denied the objection. Objection overruled. And so we went into a sealed proceeding. We had several days of sealed proceedings about some issue that you can't know about. And yesterday he was getting set and did, in fact, announce his decision about what to do. Sealed the courtroom. So he issues his order. Various motions and requests for relief were made when a little voice reported to the court, whoops, somebody forgot to hit the off switch into the press room. And so the sealed proceedings were broadcast to the press who sat by. I believe one or more outlets have reported in an oblique way about the contents of that sealed proceeding. And I'm thinking, for this, must I die as well? I see everywhere I go, things seem to spring a leak, So in any case, we are still fighting our way through that case. Monday, we will resume with the cross-examination of one of the defendants, Zachary Rell. Then Dominic Pizzola, another defendant, is expected to testify. I'm expecting that we will give closing arguments either Wednesday and Thursday or Thursday and Friday of next week. But, these rolling deadlines have a way of rolling out into the future. And now in the back of my voice, some in the back of my mind, rather, some voice is screaming, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And I'm thinking, am I really going to be here in May? And I am hoping against hope that I'm not. But you'll be with us. You'll be with us each and every step of the way if you tune in daily.
No doubt.
So this morning we thought we'd try something a little different. We'd done it once before. Good morning, Freedom Lover. An AMA. No, we're not becoming members of the American Medical Association. We don't even play doctors on the podcast, but ask us anything.
We could do ABA and just call it Ask Boyer Anything. And,
yeah.
And then people think we were talking about the American Bar Association, and perhaps we could just increase listenership through fraudulent means that way.
Well, the goal is to increase listenership. And I think one of the questions we got yesterday was, what was our immediate plans for the podcast? Or what was the question, Mike?
Here, I'll pull it up in just a second. So just for those of you that are watching live, I think I put the call out yesterday for whoever is members, subscribers, and locals, that their questions would be prioritized. And so the first one we have from locals comes from Luttrell. And Luttrell asks us, what is your goal for your careers in the podcast in the near future?
Take it away, Mike. Since you've got a longer career ahead of you than I do.
No, let's go with you first. You go first. Let's warm this up a little bit. Let's talk about your career, Norm, and then we can talk about the podcast, because I think those two things intertwine. And then I have a couple of thoughts on my career as it relates to that.
Well, first, let me back up and answer the question in the form of a fun anecdote. Pete Atkinson and lawyer Will, brothers, hot time in the Old Town last night. in DuPont Circle. We had dinner, the three of us, and what a pleasure that was. Those so shout out to Pete Repeat. Shout out to Lawyer Will. Equal points for equal participation in the mayhem of law and legitimacy last night. But here's excuse me, I must be allergic to myself, but I've known that for many years. If you're ever out to dinner with Pete Atkinson, let him choose the wine. I think we had 2 bottles last night, and it was good wine. So thanks for Pete's in DC on a business trip. Lawyer Will lives out this way, and it was a good time. Career goals for in the future of the podcast. Career, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm nearing the end of mine. I mean, let's be candid. I'll turn 68 in September, and it's been a long ride, and I don't know what the next trip is. The podcast is an important part of it, or so I hope. One of the things I fell in love with as a lawyer was debating issues of public concern, usually as they affected the interest of the client I'm standing next to. It's an exhausting life, a deeply satisfying one to be a trial lawyer. But I wonder from time to time how many more trials I have in me, of course, till the phone rings and then I'm neck deep into the next one. But I like discussing public affairs, and I think the world is interesting. So my career-wise, I'm returned to Connecticut any day now. I've got to write the Alex Jones brief, appealing the 1.5 billion Fantasyland dollar judgment against him, and then I'll move into a rape trial. He said, she said thing sometime in June, and I'll be back in DC in the fall for another January 6th trial. The podcast, I'd like to play a larger role, at least in my life, and how I spend the time that I have. And that depends in part on whether we can acquire the sort of listenership that makes it an ongoing enterprise that is capable, if not of paying the bills, at least paying some of them. And so my goals are to continue to try cases. I usually look for cases that have some principle that I think is really significant for the world at large. Free speech, the right to protest, the crisis of legitimacy in the Proud Boy case, free speech in Alex Jones' case, efforts to fight off those who believe that unpopular speech should be suppressed. And so I'm looking for more cases along those lines, and I'm looking to get more involved in the podcast. In that vein, though, I'm heavily dependent on Mike because I am a technophobe. It's not that I deplore technology, I just don't understand it all, and all the bells and whistles associated with this podcast are Mike's doing, and I'm deeply grateful for the association with him. So what do you think, Mike? What are your goals, career and podcast wise? Oh yeah
I think you got 1 or 2 left in you.
Yeah, well, but here, and at least you have a comedy show. Well, don't forget May 18th. Mark your calendars. Head out to Mohegan Sun, and you can learn about woke insurance, identifying as a tax-exempt corporation, and so forth. It will have a good time.
Absolutely. I'll take up the career question first, and I'm not just blowing smoke on this, but it is one of my personal ambitions, perhaps, to co-counsel a case with Norm Pattis.
Objection! Overruled. Come on, Bond. Yeah. I think we've temporarily lost audio, at least for Mike, so I will talk while he solves it until I hear him again. I don't know if you can hear either of us. So another one of my objectives in the podcasting industry is to understand the frickin' technology that undergirds this. We've had a series of bumps in the road recently. Mike, you're back, and I think it might be related to the Roadcaster, but we don't want to be sued by them for adverse advertising. You're back. Hi. He's gone. And so one of my goals is to find why the podcast, why talk about things at all. I think we want to make America think again. And I look at the world around me with a sense of wonder and a sense of dis-ease. And I yet live in this world and want to live in it for as long as I can. So the broader objective of this podcast is to engage people in civil and civic discourse on issues that matter to us all and point away beyond the partisan divides that seem to divide people into warring camps. We're inspired by a sense of community, a sense that the word society comes from the Latin word for friends, for friendship. We may not always be able to be friends with one another or even friendly to one another, but we have to learn to live together in better terms than we're doing now. And so our hope is that this podcast fits into a broader ideological discussion. It creates a challenge because what succeeds and what gets people fired up in the electronic or digital universe is rage. And so if I was Dan Bongino, I could get here and say, a new outrage last night, and in case you missed it, and I could scream at you for half an hour. And a lot of people respond to that. I don't. I'm toxic. I'm toxic to that. So one of the gambles, we don't want to be the NPR of podcasts. That would be boring. But one of the gambles is to find an engaging, meaningful way of discussing issues in the community that generates a sense of community. And you, our listeners and viewers, will determine whether that works. Mike, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm going to have to be a little bit less of a I guess a smooth audio voice here because I don't know what's going on with the Roadcaster stuff this past few days. So I apologize to everybody. What I was saying is that one of my personal ambitions would be to co-counsel a case with Norm Pattis, and I wouldn't have said that, but for perhaps the last maybe 6 months, Norm. And if you hear my dogs chirping in the background, they tend to howl together if they see somebody that they don't like. Anyway, Norm, you and I have talked offline about certain matters that have begun to come my way just by and through the nature of what I do. Right, I practice in the administrative and regulatory field very frequently on behalf of business clients, and the way that the climate is here in North Carolina, I think it's a microcosm of what we've seen, largely at the federal level, but the nation overall. And I sense I have this intuition that my advocacy within those more administrative and regulatory proceedings are going to become geared for more criminal defense matters. And I just don't see a way around that unless I were to subtract myself from the nature of my practices. I know it, which I don't intend to do. My law partner and I have worked quite hard and continue to work hard, and we have distanced ourselves from those similarly situated in the field of beverage alcohol law and a couple of other areas. And so, I look forward to continuing to do that. But I think that, Norm, I have a tremendous amount that I could learn from you. You've already given me a few jewels here and there to think through. And you also confirm, I think, some of my own intuition in this field. And for a long time, I think I have been somewhat afraid of criminal law. It's, when asked, I think I've usually used sort of the, I'm not much, I don't really like to go to trial, or whatever those sort of quippy, sort of easy excuses are to push that off. I think in general, it's sort of an apprehension or some sort of latent fear of mine is being so connected to the goings on of another person's life and their liberty and freedom. And I think that to more directly answer the question, Luttrell, a personal ambition of mine for my career is to continue to crush whatever those latent fears or apprehensions may be within my professional career. And one of those is knocking down the fear of being a criminal defense attorney.
Well, there's nothing like it. I mean, to me, it's the laboratory for exploring the relationship between the individual and society, and testing the boundaries of it. It's a terrifying, high stakes game. I mean, I lay in bed this morning thinking, man, I lose this Proud Boys thing, it's going to be bad for Joe. He's going to pull a lot of time. But on the other hand, I'm cocky enough to think that if there's a fight, you don't want anybody but me beside you. And that's an attitude that took me a long time to acquire. And I hope it's contagious, and I hope you catch it. We lost you again. So if somebody asks, how did I choose criminal law as a practice area? Easy. I am transfixed by the mystery of the state. I mean, I think you've heard me say it here before. Immanuel Kant, the 18th century enlightened philosopher, once said that two things filled him with wonder: the starry heavens above, looking out into the vastness of infinity, and the moral law within. How it is that we come to have a sense of what's right and what's wrong, and most of us do. The unfortunate among us apparently do not. I am transfixed by a third mystery, the mystery of public authority. I mean, how is it that people I never met don't even like, often don't vote for, can decide how much of my income to take in the form of tax, how fast I can drive my car, what I can and can't do to one another, and what is the mystery of the rule of law. The rule of law is tested in a criminal case. In a criminal case, it's usually the people of the state, the United States of America, or the state of X versus your client. And I like to remind jurors, you're not here. When you walk into the room, you probably wonder what my client did, why they're here. And that's the wrong question. You should begin by assigning the burden of proof where it belongs. What are these people alleging about my client? And can they prove it? Because they have alleged something of him tomorrow. Today, it could be you or someone the day thereafter. And the rule of law is what holds these people in check from making accusations against you, locking you up, and otherwise affecting your liberty. So for me, constitutional law is always been a fascination. I've done a lot of civil work in the Fourth Amendment context, usually in unreasonable force or illegal and unlawful arrest cases. And from there, I gravitated to criminal law, which is constitutional law in practice on the bodies
Well, Norm,
and souls of the
is it
people.
fair to ask then, does criminal law in a way choose you? Because I'm hearing a little bit of, your appeal to constitutional law. Obviously, you and I are a couple of generations apart when it comes to life experience and matriculation through, higher ed and law school. And it seems as though the answer that I just gave to the question prior about, what I want out of my career personally, it was a version of the same thing that you just said. And that is, I was drawn to understanding what it is about the basics and the fundamentals of commerce, right? And within American society, what allows people to freely move about, and what are the regulations and restrictions imposed on those that would transact in goods or services. And that tension is what I was drawn to.
Yeah.
Is being striving for an expertise in a realm where I could confidently negotiate on behalf of my clients, because I knew exactly where government and bureaucracy was going to begin to inhibit or restrict their ability to move freely in commerce. Mm-hmm. And what I have seen is a continuing encroachment of that. And it seems like, I guess I'm answering my own question, but is it a version of that where criminal law begins to choose you? Because the more that you care about that imposition of that artificial force on one's liberty, the more that you're going to be drawn into defending that wherever the fight ends up being. And the most pivotal fight is always for one's freedom in the criminal context. No?
I think that's right. And I studied political philosophy as a kid, for the first 10 years of my collegiate and professional life, and taught it for a while. And I just was, how did this happen? What is this world, this social world that we inhabit? We all have individual desires, hopes, and dreams, and then there's a collective sense of what's required for the public good or public order. How these things get conceptualized, our sense of our own nature and destiny, how the public good gets conceptualized, how the two interact. These, as far as I'm concerned, are the primary questions in life, at least in my life, and they're played out in a courtroom and on this podcast. So I think criminal law is choosing you. Mike, listen, and I'll help you. I'll help you get on your feet. But as to the podcast, where do you think we're headed with this thing?
All right, I'll hide this question for a moment. With this podcast, I think you brought up Dan Bongino and the general.
Oh, Dan Bongino! I'm here to tell you about what the deep state's up to today. Excuse me.
Well, even Mark Levin or Ben Shapiro or Choose Your Fighter in the realm of political commentary, social commentary. And I want to make sure that we continue to distinguish ourselves from that. The last thing that I want for either of us is to be perceived as merely commentators on matters of social and political relevance. So for me, and I think you as well, Norm, we've been asking ourselves, what does law and legitimacy do in the real world? So my ambitions for this media platform, this fledgling media platform that we're building here, is for us to be able to begin building some architecture in real space, whether that is within the confines of higher ed and legal institutions, and making it so that we are having an impact in the real world. I think in particular, the judiciary and the rule of law is a theme and a motif that you and I have discussed prior to now, and figuring out a way to interject law and legitimacy as a resource for those who are beginning their journey into the law, and perhaps as a countermeasure against a lot of the collectivist and sort of excesses of the political left as they have begun and realized their institutional capture of many industries, but in particular education. So I think that's my personal ambition, and I think that makes it very practical for us as well.
Well, it sounds good to me. So you flashed a question on there. Who was my mentor in criminal law?
Yep.
I have a confession to make. I didn't intend to practice law when I went to law school. I just went because I was curious about how the world worked. I'd been working as an editorial writer at the Hartford Courant for a while. And, that was the state's largest newspaper in Connecticut. And it was also commonly and jokingly referred to as the oldest continuously published paper in the United States without a Pulitzer. And of course, they've since won a Pulitzer Prize. But one of the things that I liked was, sitting in the editorial on the board, I could pick up the phone and anybody in the state would talk to me about whatever was in the news, most anybody anyhow. And I often understood what they said, but sometimes didn't. And I realized the language that they were speaking and the language that explained institutions and how they interacted with individuals was the law. So I went to law school intending to learn it so that I could write better about the world and maybe understand it better. And in law school, I fell under the influence of a man named Mike Sheldon, who I was then a judge. I think he's now a retired judge, and he taught criminal procedure. And I just had a blast in that class. To me, that was the best class in law school because it talked about the limits that the state could had to respect with respect to the seizure of persons, the interrogation of suspects, the collection of evidence, and its presentation of the evidence in a courtroom. And so toward the end of the class, I asked him, if he had any ideas of who might be looking for somebody to work with him. And he sent me down to New Haven to meet a man named John Williams. And that
God, I just have to interject. So if anybody who's listening has not listened to the podcast with John Williams, Norm, that is one of my favorite moments from our earliest days, is you sitting down with John Williams and talking about the origins of 1983 litigation. What a titan. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So John, John's about 15 years older than me, but about 150 years wiser. And so I went down to meet him after my second year, toward the end of my second year in law school. And he said, well, I got a project you can work on. He was representing a man named Daniel Webb. Daniel Webb was facing the death penalty for his abduction, rape, and murder of a bank executive some lunch hour. And you're thinking, oh, well, there's a project I want to work on. Well, but the state wanted to kill him. And so John had agreed to write the appellate briefs for him. And also in Connecticut at that time, there was some process known as proportionality review. If the state wanted to kill someone and sought and obtained a sentence of death, his appellate lawyers, the soon to be dead appellant's lawyers, were responsible for reviewing all other proceedings in which the state had sought or could have sought death, and comparing the nature of the crime and the character of the defendant against those in the capital felony pool. And so he said, how'd you like to work on that brief? And I'm like, boy, would I. So the next thing you know, I'm sitting in a small office with about 100,000 pages of trial transcripts from the pool of capital felony cases. And I spent my senior year in law school. I used to keep a box of trial transcripts in my trunk. And if I was at a party or something and I got bored, I'd go out to the car, get the box, and sit in the corner. And I read through all of these trial transcripts.
Nerd alert, baby. God.
And largely neglected going to class. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I remember one of the classes I had my last year was labor and employment law. And I turn up at the final exam and somebody says, I didn't know you were in this class. I said, well, I haven't been yet. But somebody had lent me their notes and I read a textbook, and I got an A in the course, all of which to say classes are optional. So I worked with him on that. And then we wrote the merits brief together. It was some 260 pages worth of briefs, and he let me argue that case as a brand new lawyer. By the time all the briefing was done, I was on my feet in the state Supreme Court arguing in favor of not killing this man. We got the death penalty. We got a remand on one issue, and then the case blew up. And from that I developed a working relationship with John. He made me his partner after I'd practiced for a couple of years, and we practiced together for just 15 years or so until I decided it was time to go off on my own. And so he was a fighter. Yeah, I don't want to repeat some of the language we'd use around the office, but I remember my first trial, I lost it, and I came back and I apologized to him. It was a civil rights case, and he said, "No, don't worry about it. Here's another one. Go try this one next week." And but for him, I wouldn't have been a trial lawyer. And he's now in his mid 80s. His health is failing. It's sad to see the lights going out. I'm responding to a question from Rachel Perry Goff. How is John? And he's near the end of the line. I mean, he's not taking more cases now. He's closing up his shop gradually, and one of the flames in Connecticut and in New England, indeed the United States, is going out. And I was blessed to be warned by it.
Well, and I'm always taken with this part of your personal story, Norm, just because I think about what happened next. Well, next in terms of broad chronology was Mike Cernovich at Pepperdine in the law library, searching through cases and coming across citations with your name attached to those. And at that time, it wasn't the internet that we know today. And Mike made his way to you, but that was but for you having made your way to John, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I love about the story of you and John together is understanding that qualified immunity as we know it today is due in large part to how aggressive his advocacy was in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, right?
No, yeah. So we at one point, John and I controlled 25% of the federal civil rights docket in the federal courts.
Unbelievable, Norm. That's unbelievable.
In
That gives me
Connecticut.
chills. Yeah.
And the judges were pissed about it because, hey, we didn't take all the depositions they thought we should have. And our attitude is we're here to try cases. You want to manage cases, go work at Walmart, and we were pretty vocal about it. So one day a judge called, and they used to call themselves the meeting of the minds. The judges would meet periodically, and he says, Norm, the minds are upset with you guys. And I'm like, big deal. What am I, so what do you want me to do about it? He said, we're going to start calling all your cases in. You guys better get ready. And so I went to John and I said, we got a warning shot from the robes. What do you want to do? So we promptly added 2 lawyers and some office space within a couple of weeks. And I called that judge up. I said, bring it. We're ready. And, they never did. It was a bluff. But what they did was they changed the law. And they began to get rid of cases on the basis of qualified immunity, saying you can't get a case to a jury if it's a close case, if we think the officer is entitled to the benefit of the doubt. And it was a constitutional coup d'etat by the robe-wearing class. As I've watched the evolution of police, defund the police movement, I've often thought, there's blood on the hands of someone in this country, given the way arrestees are treated, but it's really not the police, it's the judiciary. Because what they did is they permitted young men and women to go out onto the streets, poorly trained to deal with difficult questions. And those questions often end up with force being used and someone getting hurt. And we train officers that they can use force, even deadly force, in defense of themselves and others. And now society has turned on them. Well, what created that aggressive use of force? What created it was a judiciary that closed its eyes to it and basically said, Fourth Amendment beans, Eighth Amendment beans, due process beans. Police have to control crime, and unless their conduct is absolutely outrageous, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so the strike zone for what was permissible to do to people grew, and that is at the feet and hands of the federal judiciary. Now the people have begun to revolt, and we see protests in cities. It's a misguided protest because what we're now trying to do is handcuff officers so that they can't handcuff the criminals, and we're still not dealing well with this tension between arrestees and officers. I think a better way to do it would be to permit people who think they've been abused by the police to bring their case to a jury and let the jury decide, and let police officers take their guidance from the community of people and the communities they police, rather than let judges and activists do it. So there you go.
We've got another well, several more questions coming in now. This one comes in from BTL. What are some of the most rewarding aspects of being a lawyer?
Why
And
don't
before
you?
you answer that, someone asked over on Rumble what episode of our podcast that was, and it's number 75. And unless it has been removed, because those of you who have been with us since before the live stream, you remember that we had to move platforms for the podcast for various reasons. And during that transition, many of the episodes were pulled down. So even some of those even the one with Mark Richards originally was pulled down. So I'll get some of those back up as I get time over the weekend. I'll go back and pick and choose. So if the John R. Williams number 75 is not up, please send us a note and I will make sure to get that out there. But I know for a fact that from Norm's radio days, we did have John Williams call in for part one of what we called LAL Live during your stint there at whatever the acronym was with the radio station that decided that
WICC 660. We bring
Yep.
you all the news. It's not too controversial to talk about it. And if it's too controversial, we won't talk about it. So Luttrell asks, what's the meaning of life? I'll take a stab at that. Luttrell, the meaning of life is learning to play like a child. Look at a child in a sandbox as it explores the world around them and is totally wrapped in the mystery of a sandcastle. Those were the happiest days of my life. And to this day, I'm happiest when I'm engaged in a project as in a wrapped way, and the boundary between myself and others and myself is eliminated by being engrossed in something fascinating. So what's the next question?
Next question are what are some of the most rewarding aspects of being a lawyer?
Oh, man. Well, I don't need to. You might, what?
Yeah, I don't really view this question through the lens of, I guess, the vocation of being a lawyer. I think being a lawyer or the pursuit of being a lawyer has given my life ultimate meaning. And I mean that in both the shadows and in the direct sunlight of being a practitioner. So when I talk about the shadows, I mean my personal life and my personal relationships and my relationship with my wife, my parents, my son, and my friends. It has given me a sense of identity. It has given me a sense of confidence and self-esteem that I was only ever able to create in an athletic environment, right? And as we get older, obviously our physical faculties begin to wane. And even at 33, I can tell you that I look on TV and or I look around and I can see the difference in what I refer to as the tyranny of youth, right? This ignorance that time is the great equalizer, and a penchant to I guess maybe waste that in some respects. And so the journey of becoming a lawyer, I, like Norm, didn't set out for law school with a desire to be an attorney. I was really looking for a sense of meaning and a sense of understanding of the world, and I found it. Fortunate for me, I was very, very lucky. I worked very hard to do that. But I did indeed find it, but in the sunlight of being a lawyer, I think that some of the most rewarding aspects are not being a version of what people believe lawyers to be on TV, right? I take such pride in being able to meet people in and around the town that my law partner and I are now spending quite a lot of time in for reasons beyond just lawyering, and connecting with people on a level that they recognize, and then backing into their recognition of me as an attorney, because it just sort of defies that very TVS sort of Hollywood archetype of being a lawyer. I think being a lawyer is really just being a tradesman at bottom. Think about some of our country's founders and the role that attorneys have had in shaping the course and history of American society, and knowing that the skill set that people like Norm possess and the skill set that I continue to try and invest in and hone is a skill set that should be envied, I think, by those that never see it that way, or never set about to do that sort of work. I think that to me is what is most rewarding, is not the external outcomes of certain interactions and matters. It really comes from a sense that I know that I'm giving everything I can, and I'm doing everything that's within the bounds. And I truly feel like even if I can't become an expert, Norm, in something like medicine at this point in my life or whatever, I think being an attorney does afford a particular skill set such that you can know exactly what you don't know. right? There's an aspect of being able to discern information, to do research, and to put together logical thinking processes that allow one to understand where the boundaries of their confidence and competence truly are. And that's still powerful, right? Knowing one's limitations is powerful because it allows you to point out what issues need to be resolved.
Yeah, my interest is not too different from Mike's. I mean, I view the world as a fascinating and very complex case, and so when a person comes to me, they're coming to me for a reason. Nobody calls me up because, hey, he seems like a nice guy, I'd like to talk to him. Usually, they come to me looking to solve a problem in their life, and so the initial challenge on meeting a client is, do I understand what they want? Obviously, in a criminal case, they want to be free. In a civil case, it's often quite different. But do I understand what they want? Do I understand what they think a reasonable outcome is? And then do I recognize the problem that they have as one that I can help solve? And so, the law isn't mathematics. There's not a giant equation out there where if you understand one variable, you can deduce the rest. There are certain things you can know by inferential reasoning, but really what the law is a set of rules, a set of law, the law that's tautological, I realize. It's a set of principles that help determine how to resolve disputes that occur again and again in real life. So a lawyer, and a legal education isn't so much memorizing what the rules are, but it's learning how to deal and recognize fact patterns. This is a breach of contract. This is a homicide. This is a slip and fall. And so what happens? What classifies or what makes a person's life fall into one of those fact patterns? And then what are the decisions they have to make from within the grip of that fact pattern? And if those decisions are going to be made in a courtroom, then you need a trial lawyer. If you want to work them out without going to court, you get a transactional lawyer. But both lawyers are looking at doctrines, at cases, at rules to determine what the scope of the playing field is. And then the test for a creative lawyer is mixing and matching these concepts in a way that surprise your adversary and advance your client's interests. And so for me, that's the most rewarding aspect of being a lawyer. I spend a lot of time reading what are called law review articles, that is, articles by law professors about developments in the law. And friends of mine like to joke because I say, you got to read the footnotes in there too, because you're often, what I'm always looking for is some new creative idea, some novel way to bring a new twist to an old problem. And then I get to apply it in real time, hopefully to the benefit of my client. Now, I pick very difficult cases, or they pick me. And those are difficult, and it's not always possible to advance your client's interests. Sometimes your clients are hurt, and they're hurt deeply. But as I like to say to prosecutors, we have two ways to work this case out. My way and the hard way, you choose. And my goal is to stand beside my client and fight for them, whether they're right or wrong, loved or hated. And candidly, I like representing unpopular people, because I think an unpopular person tests the rule of law. And that is the biggest challenge I can think of. Standing next to Alex Jones in the Sandy Hook case after a judge defaulted him and deprived him of a defense was a challenge that I would gladly take again.
Listening to you say that makes me, I think, recognize some of the acute moments during practice when I realized that my own intuition on the front end was correct. And it makes me wonder, Norm, perhaps this is a question that you can help guide me into asking in a more intelligent way, but what the role of morality is in the creation of law and also the practice thereof. And I'll further contextualize. I often can look at a fact pattern and very quickly recognize what some of the key issues are going to be and where we should focus. And the biggest challenge with the practice at times is slowing down and what you learn in math at a young age to show your work. Because in the practice of law, one must be patient and disciplined enough to do that, because without showing one's work and without creating that custody over the facts to the law, and the propositions that flow therefrom, there really isn't a sense of justice, if I can use that word. But I think some of the most rewarding aspects of law to me are those moments where a fact pattern first lands in my lap, and my overarching sense of things leads me in a certain direction, and I pull back from that, and then maybe a month or two later, the conclusion is nearly exactly what that initial intuition was. That to me is perhaps the pull through, but that feels like more of an issue or a theme of morality than it is just skill.
I don't know. I mean, certainly, the more you practice, the more refined your intuitions get, and you'll come to realize that within a given area, there are only so many fact patterns, only so many moves on the board. So, for example, one of my favorite types of cases is murder, and every now and then there'll be a new fact pattern, a different and novel way. To kill someone, and I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. And how is the state going to prove that? Now, that sort of confounds the morality thing, because there's nothing moral about murder. It's the classic malum in se, evil in itself. And there are very few instances in which the killing of another person is justified. So the relationship of law and morality is a difficult one. I think lawmakers tend to pass laws that they think will make a good society. And when they do that, they usually have in mind some general consideration. In general, it is good that X take place under wise circumstances. And then if they create that law, it begins to affect people's lives, either in the criminal or civil context. And a lawyer tests that law against the particulars of an individual's life and says, while this law in general may be good, it's distinguishable here in the life of this man, and a moral or just decision will not take place if the rule of law is applied. And I think, and then the perspective on what's moral and what to do differs depending on your role in the criminal justice system. For example, prosecutors have a duty to do justice. Defense lawyers don't. And many people are troubled by that. You mean to say you're not there to do justice? No, I'm there to represent my client, and I have to have an inchoate faith that justice will obtain if the fight is a good fight. And so a fact finder makes decisions, the judge makes rulings. I'm there to be my client's advocate. And so, there are limits in the rules of professional conduct. I can't engage in a crime or fraud while representing my client. And I'm permitted to get out of a case if my client's goals become repugnant to me and the judge lets me out. But I don't worry, I don't worry about justice. I don't worry about morality. I worry about advocacy and creativity, and let the moralists sort it out in the end.
So there's another question. We've actually got, I think, several more coming in here, so this is good. Thank you all. Norm has mentioned he wrote 4 books. I have read 3. Can't find a 4th. Titles.
The 4th, you're going to have to work for it. It was never bound in one volume. It was called Dark Justice. It was a piece of fiction that I wrote serially about 15 years ago, and it appeared in the Connecticut Law Tribune. It ended up being about 110,000 words, and they gave me a page of the newspaper each week and said, here, why don't you try your hand at fiction? So it's the story of a man who became a judge and what being a judge did to him, and how he, when confronted with the imperatives of justice or goodness versus the law, he chose goodness and left the law because the law failed. So it's called Dark Justice. You may be able to find it online in the Connecticut Law Tribune. I never got it together to get it bound in one book. And candidly, it failed. I mean, I had no idea. I'd been writing a column for the Law Tribune and American Lawyer Media for many years at that point. And the publisher called and said, people really love your writing. You want to try your hand at fiction? I thought, hell yeah, And I thought, well, if Dickens could do it, I could do it. Well, there's a difference between being Charles Dickens and anybody else. And I learned it the hard way. So I launched this ambitious plot and got in the middle of it and thought, God almighty, how am I ever going to get out of this thing? And it was work. It was work.
Well, what are the other 3 titles?
Juries and Justice, Taking Back the Courts, and In the Trenches. And so Juries and Justice was a meditation on jury nullification and why juries ought to be able to nullify. It was based largely on the works of John Locke, an astute reviewer once said this book deserved to be a lot better, and didn't give it a good review. And he's right. It wasn't a scholarly take on the law of nullification as expressed in the law. I saved that for briefs in later cases. The other, In the Trenches and Taking Back the Courts, are collections of essays that were bound together in volumes, and they're there.
Let's see. No, we've got Lawyer Will asking Norm, who are your favorite comedians and when did you start doing stand-up?
Well, there's Lawyer Will, and his inimitable brother, Pete, and the brother whom I've not yet met, Luke. Thanks again for dinner last night, guys. It was fun. I just think Robin Williams, to me, and that zany sort of confrontation of the intellect against experience, he makes me laugh the way no one else does. I liked Carlin's irreverence, and his ability to just call bullshit when he saw it, with impunity and with delight. And I liked the way the audiences resonated with him. I watched Chris Rock the other day. I just wasn't knocked out. I don't know why. I mean, I think Chris Rock was a comedic Dan Bongino. I wanted him to stop hollering at me. And so I sort of like the subtle under the radar approach, or the zany intellect unbound. When did I start doing stand up? The first day I walked into a courtroom and asked a jury for a not guilty verdict in a case where my client was guiltier than sin, and did it with a straight face. I mean, I remember a case. I mean, there's a certain, being a trial lawyer and a stand-up comic have a lot in common. You have to improvise with the material that life gives you. So I remember in a case 15 years ago or so, my client was a female black firefighter in the city of New Haven, and she'd reached a glass ceiling, and she brought an employment discrimination action. My former partner, John Williams, who we spoke about earlier, developed the case and asked me to try it. And I did, and we won $1 million+ verdict for her. And in the course of cross-examining the municipal officials, I resorted to humor. One of the city's witnesses testified that when our client had made a comment about his obesity, it was one of the worst and most humiliating days in his life. And I said, "Oh, really? It hurt you that badly? Did it?" I said, "Well, how about that time you were pretending to be anally raped by one of your colleagues with a smile on your face and it was captured on Polaroid? How did you feel about that?" And he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." So I showed him the Polaroid and I started, was that good for you, dear? And, and the jury started laughing. So, and it was like that trial. And so when I left the courtroom, the jurors were waiting for me outside the courthouse door, and they said, "Do you ever do stand-up comedy?" And and I thought, wow, maybe I should. And so I've aspired to do it for a long time. About a year or so ago, I was invited to go to a local venue where, in New Haven, where there was a competition, a talent show or something like that, and comics and musicians were featured. And so I decided to compete, and I made my way to the finals. There were 3 acts in the finals over a four performance rotation, and I was with 2 musicians in the end who were spectacular, and there was no way I was going to compete. And I flopped gloriously in that last round, and notoriously too, because I dropped the N-word, dropped my drawers, and people to this day still don't want to talk to me about it. And you can see references to it online. Alex Jones drops pants and uses it. Alex Jones's lawyer drops pants and uses N-word in failed comedic enterprise. Well, yeah, that's their view. And as a performance, it didn't work, and I didn't win the contest. But so that's when I started taking a little bit of a break in the last year while I worked through the Jones case and the Proud Boys case. But I'm back on stage on May 18th at the Mohegan Sun Casino, and I hope to see you all there.
Rachel asks, can a political leader be an attorney, a lender, and a law changer? And I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Norm, if you want to take a stab, but I'm led to say it's difficult.
I don't know, a lender. I mean, like a banker?
That I think that's the way I'm reading it. It's, an advocate, a lender, and someone that actually changes the law. So can you advocate under the law? Can you, have a pecuniary interest, right? Uh, and also, and I'm assuming this is simultaneously. So,
I don't see what I mean. Look, I every time I hear a question that says can an X do Y, I'm thinking, yeah, I could figure out how to do Y and be X. And so I mean, I think the real question in life is why would you let anyone tell you no? And so if a person has a vision of the future and thinks the law should be changed, they should try to change it. If a person is a lawyer who counsels clients within the shadow of the law that within the law that the shadows existing law casts, good. Just don't confuse your desire for changing the law with your client's interest. I'm very, very suspicious sometimes of activist lawyers who think that their vision of justice should obtain in a courtroom. And they're so busy talking about their ideal of justice, they sacrifice their client's interests at the altar of what is just within the current regime. So be careful, be very careful of movement lawyers. As to the role of being a lender, I mean, that's just something I've never thought about. But I mean, if there are rules about how you and when you can lend money, I think you want to be careful. You want to make sure that you don't take advantage of people. Lawyers have a duty of fairness to third parties, and I think the profession requires that lawyers at least try to be just. So I don't know. I don't see why not. I think it's like any other thing. If you're going to balance multiple roles, you need to understand the limits of each and try to harmonize them. But if you're a lawyer, you have to remember one thing, and that is that the duty of loyalty to your client means their interests come before yours, and they come before your ideals, they come before your goals, they come before your profit. If you undertake to represent a person, their interests become yours, and you forget that at your peril.
Yeah, and their clients also create conflict downstream, right?
Yeah.
Either immediately or down the road. So I think that's a really good point. And to that end, I think it's quite difficult to be a young, hungry attorney because you are apt to take anything and everything that will walk through the door and be patient enough to realize. I think a more valuable aspect of one's practice really lies in their ability to have discretion over what clients they're able to take.
Well, yes and no, but don't be too quick to say no. And one of the things John taught me is everybody's got rights, and a lawyer's job is to advocate those clients' rights. And so, in the criminal law, it's very rarely the case that somebody will come in and say, "Hey, I raped my 7-year-old daughter. Do you like me?" That's a hard case. But that person has rights before the law. There's a young lawyer in Connecticut whose name I don't want to mention, but he regards himself as a social justice warrior, and he's an insufferable ass. He's run for office, and he picks cases that he identifies with, and then he out emotes his clients. He out royals the king, as it were, because he's so determined to get justice for them that he makes a complete ass of himself, and he's not a very effective advocate. But I would say young lawyers should take as many cases as they can and learn to identify the line that separates your wishes from your client's interests, and then ask yourself, can I really? Sorry, and then learn, can I really advocate for this client? Because if you can't, then you shouldn't take the case. And so the line is, can you be a zealous advocate for your client? And if you can, do it.
It's good advice. I think we have sort of run to the end of our questions here, Norm.
Cool.
And
the end of our week, right?
Yeah, really, it's been a very, very, very quick week. Lots of stuff. I'll be reflecting on some of the things that we covered this week, going into next week. But I think I'm looking forward to you being done with this Proud Boys case. I know there are those in your personal life that are as well. And I can certainly understand. I think it's been, since January since you've been home. So,
I
think everybody here who shows up every day is grateful for what you have done there. And I think I'm uniquely positioned to understand the sacrifice that you have in fact made in so doing. So thank you. And I think my last question is just for me to you and for us to just pontificate in front of the viewers that remain here. What are we going to do with this once you have your time back, so to
So
speak?
it's funny. When I was at dinner last night with Pete and Will, Pete said, I felt like it was a job interview almost. Pete said, where do you imagine yourself 5 years from now? And that was the one question I wasn't prepared for. And so aside from the obvious, hopefully alive, I tried to take the question seriously, and I said, well, as to this podcasting stuff, I really enjoy it, but it's an open question whether you and I can acquire a sort of following that makes this a viable economic enterprise. And it may, and I'm open to the possibility of failure. It may be that the podcasting universe craves the big shouting personality, the Dan Bongino, the walking rage, the perpetual sense of crisis. I just can't offer that, and I can't pretend that I want to. My view is that there has to be a role in the world for the voice of reason, and that reason is at its best and it's challenged most when confronting passion. And the passions that inspire our politics now are particularly dark. So I would like to find a way, Mike, to get us into the front line of the discussion of the discussion of those issues that most deeply divide us, with an aim to understanding what the division is and a commitment to looking for a way to bridge the gap. It may be that there will be occasions when oil and water won't mix, and we'll have to draw a hard line and say, this is a line we won't cross, and we condemn those on the other side of it. But I think that should be the last line of defense rather than the line of attack. And every effort should be made to understand before you condemn. And so, I'd like to find a way to broaden our platform, but I don't know if there's a market for it. I honestly don't. And if there is, I don't know that I know how to tap it.
Well, I think that there certainly is, and I only say that because there wasn't a market for Carolina Craft Legal before Carolina Craft Legal was what it was. And I think that what we've realized here in the last several months is that, there can be a more boutique aspect to what's being done. When you compare oneself to Dan Bongino or the bigger ones, right? That's a very difficult mountain to climb, and I think it also does not do enough service to the number of economic interest holders that are behind that. Right,
Yeah,
there are lots and lots of competing interests that build for that visibility and create for advertisement. So I think that our aim is perhaps going to be different. I think that we are going to sort of create more of a boutique feel for this, and we're going to create something that people can come to and contribute to, and our efforts will be geared towards that. If we never reach some sort of scaled success by objective measures of mainstream entertainment, I don't know that bothers me as much as feeling as though we would have sold ourselves out if that's what it took to do that. Norm,
yeah. No, I think that's right.
I think that's what binds the two of us, and so I'm confident that provided we can get your time back and you and I can really get into the nuts and bolts of what that looks like, that will create something that people will want to hang around for.
Well, I'm hoping one of these days, the case will be over, and then there's going to likely be another one. But we'll figure it out.
Yeah, BTL says Norm just needs to promote the podcast and the next big public trial. Treat it like InfoWars.
Hi, this is Norm Pattis here and Mike Boyer, and we're going to tell you what's really going on in the world. George Soros, buckle your seatbelt, baby, because here we come, right?
What do we call our brain pills? We had a name that day. I can't remember what they are now. We need
brain farce one, Hey, if you woke up this morning troubled about the world and all that was in it and overwhelmed by its complexity, take our new pill, Brain Farce One. It'll decrease your IQ by 10 percentage points on its first application. And if you really, 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 really want to look dumb, take 5 pills as I just did, and you'll forget what the end of the sentence is when you begin it. Yeah, Brain Farce One. It's $79.95. Get it while it lasts. There you go.
All right. Well, Norm, a good weekend to you. I'll see you on Monday morning. For everybody who's listening audio only, we appreciate you tuning in after the fact. And most importantly, those who are with us every morning via Rumble or Twitter or YouTube. You make what we do here real and worth it and worth investing further into. So thank you. I'll spare all the plugs and just, slot those for next week. Norm, have fun today, being off from court. I'll see you on Monday.
You will. Take care, Mike. Take care, everyone.